My name is Edna Mae Holloway. I'm 82 years old, and I lived, in a small town in North Carolina, the kind of place where everybody knows your business, but no one really knows your heart. I was once a school teacher, loved by generations of children. I had a husband, 3 kids, and a white porch swing that I thought would carry me through my golden years in peace. But peace is a funny word. I thought I had earned it. After raising 3 children, nursing my husband through cancer until he passed, and giving up every dream I had to make sure they all had theirs. Don't I deserve peace? At least dignity? At least freedom? Instead, I got a room. A room with no doorknob on the inside. It happened on a Monday. That morning, my youngest son, Jeremy, came to pick me up from my house, the one my husband and I built with our own hands. He told me we were going out for lunch. "You need to get out, Ma," he said with that fake smile he wears like a mask. I wore my Sunday dress. The blue one with the little white buttons. I even curled my hair. I thought maybe we'd go to Applebee's or even down to the lake for a walk like we used to. But instead, we drove 30 miles out, to a big brick building with shiny windows and a pretty name. Willow Grove Assisted Living. I asked him, "Jeremy, why are we here?" He looked away. He didn't answer until a nurse walked out with a clipboard. "She's all yours now," Jeremy said. And just like that, I was no longer a mother. No longer a homeowner. I was a patient. The door clicked shut behind me. That's how it started. My name is Edna Mae, and they locked me away like an animal. But they didn't know what kind of animal I am. Before we go any further, let me say this. If you're watching this and it hits a nerve, maybe you've seen your grandma mistreated, or maybe you're scared you'll end up like me, don't stay quiet. Speak up. And please do something for me. Hit the like button. Subscribe to this Grandma Stories channel. And turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a story like mine. Also, drop a comment below, and let us know where in the country you're watching from. Whether you're in Ohio, Texas, California, or a small town like mine, your voice matters here. Now back to that room. What Jeremy didn't know was that I wasn't going to stay locked up. Not forever. Because one night, something happened that changed everything. I'll never forget the sound the lock made when that door closed behind me. It wasn't just the click of a doorknob. It was the sound of my freedom being stolen. The room they gave me wasn't ugly, not at first glance. It had cream-colored walls, a small window facing the parking lot, and a stiff single bed with flowered sheets. There was even a little armchair by the corner, like they wanted me to feel at home. But nothing about that place felt like home. Not even close. They took my purse, my cell phone. Even the necklace my late husband, Walter, gave me on our 40th anniversary. For safekeeping, the nurse had said with a smile too bright to trust. I asked if I could call my daughter, Cheryl. "She'll call you later, Miss Holloway," they said. She didn't. Not that day. Not the next either. I sat in that cold little room for hours, staring at the wall, wondering how I got there. Let me back up a little. After Walter died, I stayed in the house. I kept everything just the way he left it. His coffee mug on the counter. His boots by the back door. His jacket still hanging on the hook. Some people said I was living in the past, but I didn't care. That house was full of love. My memories. My peace. But peace doesn't pay property taxes. And little by little, my kids started checking in on me more often. It started with phone calls. Then visits. Then suggestions. "Maybe you shouldn't be living alone, Ma. It's not safe anymore. What if you fall? What if something happens?" I told them I was fine. I still cooked, cleaned, went to the market, paid my bills. But they kept pushing. Especially Jeremy. I thought it was concern. I thought he just wanted what was best for me. Now I see it clearly. He wanted the house. He wanted the money. He wanted me out of the way. I remember the day he showed up with those papers. "Just sign them, Ma. It's power of attorney. It's just in case something happens." I didn't want to. I hesitated. He put his hand on mine and said, "You trust me, don't you?" I did. I signed. And that's how I lost everything without even realizing it. They took control of my accounts, my medical records, even my mortgage. I didn't know what they were doing until it was too late. One day I was drinking coffee on my porch. The next, I was being taken out for lunch. Except lunch turned into imprisonment. Back at Willow Grove, time moved differently. You're not allowed outside unless you're supervised. You can't lock your door. You can't open your window. You can't even choose your own toothpaste without approval. It's like being a child again, but without love, without warmth, without freedom. The nurses aren't all cruel. But the system? The system is rotten. They decide when you eat, what you eat, when you shower, whether you're cooperative or resistant. They have codes for everything. I heard them whisper once. Room 108 is slipping. Dementia maybe. Room 108 was me. I don't have dementia. I have grief. I have loneliness. I have the rage of a woman whose life was stolen by the very people she raised. On the third day, I asked if I could go outside. Just for some air. Just to sit in the sun. They said the outdoor area was under maintenance. But I saw from the window. There were others outside. Sitting, walking, even laughing. I wasn't allowed out. Why? Because I asked too many questions. I started keeping notes on a piece of tissue I hid under my mattress. Who disappeared? Which nurse came in after hours? What time the lights shut off? When the locks clicked? I wasn't just living in that place anymore. I was watching, listening, waiting. And one night, I heard something that changed everything. A voice, weak, trembling but clear, coming from the wall beside my bed. Help me. I froze. Who was that? Was someone else trapped too? That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just neglect. This was a secret, a dangerous one. And if I wanted to get out, I needed to know exactly what they were hiding. I used to believe that pain only came from the outside. Bruises, cuts, broken bones. But I've learned something inside Willow Grove. The deepest pain doesn't bleed. It grows slowly, quietly, like mold in a forgotten corner of the soul. I woke up on my 6th morning there to the sound of someone crying through the wall. First I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard it again. A soft, broken whisper. A woman's voice. Please, someone. Please let me out. It sent a chill through my whole body. I pressed my ear to the wall. I whispered, hello? Who's there? Nothing. Just the creak of the heater and the dull thud of a cart rolling down the hallway. That day at lunch I tried to ask around. Most of the residents didn't talk much. Some were too far gone. Others were too scared. But there was one woman, Myrtle, who had eyes that still burned with fire. She sat in her wheelchair in the corner of the dining room, a book always in her lap but never open. I shuffled over and sat beside her. I heard something last night, I said, pretending to sip my watery soup. She didn't look at me, just muttered. You heard the wall woman. The what? She sighed. Room 217. It's locked. Always has been. They say no one lives there, but I know someone does. I've heard her crying too. Years ago she was one of us. Smart. Strong. Too strong. Started asking questions. They locked her in. I didn't know whether to believe her. But that voice in the wall? It was real. That night I stayed up. I kept the light off. I waited. And around 2 a.m. I heard it again. Not crying this time. Humming. A slow, shaky version of You Are My Sunshine. It was the same lullaby I used to sing to my daughter, Ruthie, when she was little. I pressed my ear to the wall again. My hands were shaking. Who are you? I whispered. The humming stopped. Then I heard her voice, low and hoarse. They took everything. They'll take you too. I stepped back. My breath caught in my throat. What had I gotten myself into? I spent the next few days watching more carefully. The nurses were always polite when someone was watching. But behind closed doors, I saw a nurse yank a tray away from a man who asked for a second slice of toast. I saw another one slap an old woman's hand when she tried to get up to use the bathroom. But worst of all, I noticed that every time someone got too loud, too demanding, too clear-minded, they got moved. Not to another wing. No, they just disappeared. One day they were there. The next, their bed was empty.
No goodbye. No suitcase.
Just gone. I began to wonder. Was that what happened to the woman behind the wall? Had she spoken out? Had they silenced her? And if I wasn't careful, would I be next? I made up my mind. I was going to find room 217. But one morning, just as I was rolling my walker toward the east hallway, the one they always kept closed with a fake wet floor sign, a nurse stepped in front of me. Tall, cold, blonde ponytail too tight. "Back to your room, Miss Holloway," she said. "But I'm just..." "Now." She put her hand on my arm. It wasn't a suggestion. That was the moment I realized this place didn't care about kindness. Cared about control. Later that night, Myrtle wheeled herself into my room when no one was looking. "They're watching you now," she whispered. "Let them," I said. "I'm not afraid." She leaned in close. "You should be the last person who wasn't afraid." I waited. She just shook her head. They made her disappear. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Because now I knew something for sure. This wasn't just a nursing home. It was a prison. And somewhere inside, someone else was already trapped, forgotten. I couldn't let that be me. I wouldn't. But what I didn't know then was that they had already started planning my removal. You know the worst part of being locked up in a place like Willow Grove? It's not the loneliness. It's not even the humiliation. It's how quickly people stop seeing you as human. You become a file, a case, a chart on a clipboard hanging outside your door. And the moment you start thinking for yourself, they label you as difficult. That was what they were starting to call me. "Miss Holloway has been combative," one nurse said outside my door. I wasn't combative. I was aware. And awareness is dangerous in a place like this. After the whisper through the wall, I stayed alert every night. I kept my lights off and my ears open. The crying, the humming, the voice, "Help me." They all came from the same room. Room 217. The locked room at the end of the east hallway. No one ever went in. But I saw something that made my blood run cold. One evening, after dinner, I snuck past the nurses' station when they were dealing with a broken wheelchair. I wheeled myself fast down the east wing before anyone noticed. And then I saw it. A man, tall, bald, wearing no name tag, was slipping into room 217. He wasn't a nurse. I'd never seen him before. And he was holding a large black bag. He looked around before going in, and the door clicked shut. I backed away quickly and returned to my room before anyone could ask where I'd been. Later that night, I whispered through the wall again. "Are you there?" No answer. I tapped 3 times. Then tap, tap, tap. She was there. The woman behind the wall. "You're not crazy," she whispered. "They drugged me when I started asking questions. I was a volunteer here. I saw too much." That hit me like a slap to the face. "What did you see?" I whispered back. She hesitated. Then she said something I'll never forget. They were moving residents in the middle of the night, loading them into vans. "No paperwork. No goodbyes. Just gone." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" I think they're selling them." "Selling?" "Not for what you think. Medicaid fraud. Insurance scams. They list them as dead and ship them off to these illegal private facilities. Some folks never see the outside again. They get paid for every patient that dies in care." I covered my mouth. This wasn't just about neglect anymore. This was about money. About crimes. And I was sitting in the middle of it all. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Nurse Valerie, cold ponytail, fake smile, came into my room with a tiny paper cup of pills. I looked at them carefully. White, round, bitter-looking. "I don't take these," I said. "Doctor's orders," she replied. "What doctor?" She didn't answer. Just crossed her arms. I picked up the cup and pretended to swallow them. As soon as she left, I spat them out into a napkin and hid them behind the curtain. That night, I started shaking. Not from fear. From rage. They thought they could control me with pills. With lies. With a locked door and a soft voice. But they had no idea who I used to be. I wasn't just a schoolteacher. I was a mother. A wife. A woman who had marched in protests, fought for kids who had no voice, and held my dying husband's hand while he took his last breath. I was not going to be silenced. I needed help. I needed evidence. And I needed someone on the outside. But everyone on the outside had turned their back on me. Everyone, except maybe Myrtle. She came to my room the next day. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked. She nodded slowly. I saw a van. Black. No license plate. Parked behind the dumpster. Can you help me? She looked around, lowered her voice. I already am. I stole something. From her robe pocket, she pulled out a folded paper. It was a patient transfer form. Signed. Stamped. But the name on it, it was for a woman who hadn't even died yet. They had already marked her as expired. But she was still walking the halls that morning. Myrtle whispered. They're planning her disappearance next. I folded the paper carefully and hid it inside a Bible in my drawer. The only place they never checked. I finally had proof. But if they found out I had it, I wouldn't make it to the end of the week. Because now I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was a witness. And people who know too much in places like this, they don't stay long. Have you ever felt invisible? Not in the quiet way, but in a dangerous way. Like your screams could shake the walls and no one would hear them. That's how I felt the morning I woke up and realized my drawer had been opened. The Bible where I'd hidden the forged patient transfer form was gone. I panicked. My hands started shaking. My chest tightened. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I rang the nurse's bell. No one came. I rang again. Still nothing. It took 30 minutes for someone to finally show up. But it wasn't Nurse Valerie this time. It was the tall man. The bald one I'd seen slip into room 217. Good morning, Miss Holloway, he said, calm as could be. I'm Mr. Chadwick. I handle special compliance here at Willow Grove. Where's my Bible? I asked. He smiled. You're mistaken. You didn't have a Bible. I stared at him. I know what I had. And I know what was inside it. His eyes went cold. You're confused. It happens at your age. My age. I'd buried a husband, raised 3 kids, survived cancer once, and paid off 2 mortgages. But now I was confused? No, I was not the confused one. He leaned in closer. Let me give you some advice. Stop asking questions. Stop snooping. Stop listening to walls. Then he walked out. That was the moment I knew. They were watching me. And they were scared. But fear does funny things to a person. For me, it made me sharper. More alert. More determined. If they wanted a fight, they'd picked the wrong grandma. I stayed quiet for the rest of the day. Smiled. Nodded. Took my pills, and flushed them down the sink when no one was looking. But that night, I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I wheeled myself out of bed and crept into the hallway. I knew the routine now. The cameras. The shift changes. The blind spots. I made it to the east wing and paused at room 217. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Then soft knocking. 3 slow taps from the other side. She was still in there. Tomorrow night, I whispered. I'm coming back. I didn't know how yet, but I would, even if it meant going through hell. The next day, Myrtle didn't show up at breakfast. I asked the staff. They said she had an episode and was being evaluated, but she'd been fine the day before. She'd helped me. She'd taken a risk. And now she was gone. I knew what that meant. They were cleaning house. By lunch, Nurse Valerie came to get me. The director would like to see you. I refused. She tightened her jaw. That wasn't a request. She wheeled me into a small office at the far end of the building. Mr. Chadwick was waiting. I've spoken to your son, he said. He's given full medical consent for your care plan to be adjusted. What kind of adjustment? He smiled. Sedation therapy. You've been under a lot of stress, Miss Holloway. We believe you'll rest better with some help. I looked him in the eye. You mean drug me until I shut up? He didn't blink. I mean help you relax. I stood up. I'm not crazy. And I'm not alone. But I was wrong. Because when I asked to call Cheryl, my daughter, I was told her number had been disconnected. I asked to speak to a lawyer. They told me, you're under medical observation. You don't need legal representation. I wasn't a patient anymore. I was a prisoner. And that night, they gave me new pills. Red ones. Stronger. I could smell it. I hid them again. But I knew what they were trying to do. They wanted to erase me. My memories. My words. My will. But I had one last move. I waited until 3 a.m. Then I slipped out of bed, heart pounding, and wheeled myself back to the East Wing. And for the first time, room 217 was unlocked. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the lights were dim. The air was cold. And in the far corner, hunched in a chair with her back to me, was the woman. She turned her head slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. But she was real. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would." And just as I stepped further inside, a loud alarm blared through the hallway. They knew. They were coming for me. The alarm screamed through the hallway like a fire truck barreling toward a burning home. But I didn't run. I couldn't. Not because of my knees. Because of what I saw. The woman in room 217, her name was Patricia, sat slumped in a wheelchair, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her silver hair was knotted, her cheeks hollow, her wrists bruised from restraints. And yet, her eyes locked onto mine like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally see her. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "They'll do to you what they did to me." "What did they do?" She looked toward the corner of the room. That's when I saw it. A wall of black filing cabinets. Neat. Labeled. Locked. But one drawer was slightly open. I stepped toward it. Inside were folders. Patient files. Stamped discharged or deceased, but some of the names I recognized. Myrtle. Mrs. Lang. Franklin, the veteran from room 106. They weren't dead. They weren't discharged. They were disappeared. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. Photos. Fingerprints. Lists of medications. Transfer records. Signatures that didn't match. They were forging documents, claiming government money for patients they had lost. Some were sent to underground facilities. Others might not have survived. I turned to Patricia. "You knew." She nodded weakly. "I was a volunteer. I saw them moving residents out the back. One night I followed the van. Took photos. Tried to go to the police. Next day they declared me mentally unfit and put me in here. No court hearing. No lawyer. Just vanished." I covered my mouth. She had been trapped in room 217 for almost 5 years. Drugged. Forgotten. Until now. The alarm kept blaring. Red lights flashed down the hallway. Then footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Getting closer. I reached into the drawer, grabbed as many folders as I could, and shoved them inside Patricia's blanket. "Can you stand?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Not yet. They've kept me too weak." I didn't have time to think. I looked around and spotted a laundry cart in the corner. Without asking, I began stuffing the folders underneath the dirty towels and sheets. "I'm coming back for you," I told her. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I believe you." I closed the door behind me and pushed the laundry cart into the hallway, just as the alarm shut off. Nurse Valerie and Mr. Chadwick were waiting. "Where were you?" she asked. "I had an accident." "In the restroom," I said. Didn't want to make a mess, so I took the laundry cart. She eyed me suspiciously. "Why are you out of your room?" "I had an accident," I repeated, louder this time. "I needed clean clothes." She stepped closer, but Chadwick held her back. "It's fine," he said. "We'll deal with it." I pushed the cart past them, wheeled it back to my room, locked the door behind me, and dumped the contents under my mattress. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I had proof now. I had names. Records. The truth. But the next morning, everything changed. When I opened my door, there were no residents in the hallway. No nurses. No breakfast smells. Only silence. And then I saw the paper on the floor. A typed note. "You have 1 day. Turn it over. Or you'll disappear next." They knew. They knew everything. And now it wasn't just about escaping. It was about survival. I stood there in my doorway, gripping the edge of the paper like it was made of fire. "You have 1 day. Turn it over. Or you'll disappear next." 1 day. That's all they were giving me. To fold. To break. To hand over the evidence and pretend none of this ever happened. But they didn't know me, not really. I'd survived more in one lifetime than most folks read about in novels. I lost a baby and still taught 3rd grade the next day. I held my dying husband's hand and still baked cornbread for the church crowd that same Sunday. I don't break. I don't fold. I endure. And now I had to move, quietly, quickly, smart. I waited until the morning meds were passed, and the staff's attention was scattered. Then I wheeled myself into the small community library, the one nobody used anymore. It had a broken computer and a busted coffee maker, but it still had an Ethernet plug. I hadn't used a computer in years, but I knew enough. I pulled the files out from under my sweater, 7 folders total. Scanned names, DOB diagnoses, fake death certificates. Then, with trembling fingers, I scanned each page using the old fax copier and emailed the images to the one person I thought might listen. Detective Daniel Reeves. He investigated my neighbor's break-in a few years back. Honest. Quiet. He gave me his card once when my husband passed. I prayed he still used that email. Subject line.
Urgent.
Patients being silenced and sold at Willow Grove. I hit send. And then I waited. All day. I stared at the hallway from the crack in my door. Listened to the staff laughing. Pretending. Planning. No one said a word to me. But their eyes did. They knew I had done something. I was a lit fuse. They just didn't know how long until I exploded. That night, after lights out, I went back to room 217. Patricia was sitting in her chair. Her face looked a little brighter. I sent the files, I whispered. To who? A detective. Someone I trust. She smiled faintly. You're braver than I ever was. No, I said. I just don't have time to be scared. She reached for my hand and squeezed it. I don't think I can last much longer in here, she said. But even if I don't make it out, you did something. And I swore to her, right there in the dark, I would not let her be forgotten. But just as I turned to leave, the door flung open. Nurse Valerie. Thought I might find you here, she said. Behind her stood 2 men. Not orderlies. Not security. Just men in black shirts with no name tags. My stomach dropped. We're transferring Miss Holloway, Valerie said too calmly. Effective immediately. To where? I asked, trying to stay firm. She didn't answer. They grabbed my arms. I screamed. Patricia screamed. I fought like hell, scratched, kicked, bit. And then, a voice cut through the chaos. Let go of her. Now. A flashlight beam blinded us all for a second. Detective Reeves. Behind him were 2 officers and a woman in a state medical badge jacket. Willow Grove is under investigation, he said. Step away from her. The men backed off. Valerie tried to talk. Officer, she's mentally unstable. We received documents. Signed transfers for deceased patients who aren't dead. Photos. Medical abuse. You've got a lot to answer for. He turned to me. Miss Holloway, are you okay? I nodded. Barely. Can you walk? Not yet, I said. But I can fight. They escorted me out. Out of the cage. Out of the lies. Into the night air. Into freedom. Patricia was wheeled out right behind me, wrapped in a blanket, blinking at the stars like she hadn't seen the sky in years. She hadn't. The cameras flashed. Reporters showed up. The gates of Willow Grove were sealed. The empire of silence had crumbled. But I knew this wasn't the end. Because now the world had seen. Now they knew. And for the first time in years, I could breathe again. But even in freedom, something else was waiting for me. Something that would test my strength more than Willow Grove ever could. The morning I disappeared started just like the others. The nurses gave me the usual lukewarm oatmeal, and the dry toast with no butter. There was no greeting. No kindness. Just silence and doors closing in my face. But inside me, something had changed. I was done waiting for someone to save me. I had spent decades being a mother, a wife, a homemaker. I had served meals, kissed bruises, stayed up nights for crying children. I gave everything. And now, at 83, I was locked in a home like I was a burden. That morning, while the other residents were in the dining hall, I quietly slipped back into my room. I had studied the routine long enough to know when the staff changed shifts. There would be a 15-minute window when no one would be watching the side entrance near the laundry. I had stolen a maintenance apron 2 nights before. Folded it under my mattress. I pulled it on over my nightgown and tucked a scarf around my head. I looked like any one of the staff, old, slow, invisible. That was the trick, really. When people don't see you, they never expect you to leave. I moved with purpose. Heart pounding. I passed 2 nurses who didn't even look up from their phones. The side door was propped open for deliveries. I slipped out, felt the breeze hit my face, and I nearly cried right there. Fresh air. Birds. The sky. Freedom. I didn't run. My knees wouldn't let me. But I walked with every ounce of strength left in my body. I had no money. No phone. Just a slip of paper in my pocket with a name and an address. Caroline Harper. My best friend from high school. She had moved 2 towns over years ago. We'd lost touch. But I prayed that kindness hadn't left her heart. It took me nearly 4 hours of walking, hitching a ride with a farmhand, resting under bus stops. But when I finally knocked on her door, it was like time rewound. She opened that door and gasped, "June." And then her arms were around me. I collapsed into her, sobbing. "I got out," I whispered. "I finally got out." Caroline didn't ask questions at first. She just held me. Like I mattered. Like I was human again. That night, she made us tea, wrapped me in blankets, gave me the first real meal I'd had in months. I told her everything. Every cruel word from Sarah. Every lie. Every locked door. She listened. She believed me. "I'll help you," she said. "But you can't stay here long. If they find you, they'll try to drag you back." I knew that. I didn't care. I wasn't going back. What came next was a whirlwind, old secrets, the past returning, and a plan that would make Sarah regret ever crossing me. But it started with one step out that door. I had escaped the cage they built for me, and now I was going to light a fire under everything they thought they could hide. What happened after that moment changed everything. The days following my confrontation with Deborah were filled with silence. Not just from her, but from the walls of our home that once echoed with laughter and music. Even the birds outside seemed quieter, as if they too sensed the weight of the secret I now carried. I busied myself with chores. I washed the curtains. I cleaned under the furniture. I repainted the porch rails. But no matter how hard I scrubbed or painted, nothing could cleanse the ache in my chest. The betrayal was too deep. Then one quiet Thursday afternoon, as I was rearranging the drawers in my old oak writing desk, I found something that shook my world once more. It was a letter, tucked carefully between the pages of an old recipe book. The handwriting was unmistakably Deborah's. Curiosity took over. I hesitated because I knew better than to read a letter not meant for me, but something inside screamed, "You need to know." So I unfolded it with trembling hands. "Dear Mom, I don't know how to tell you this face to face. I've seen how happy you look lately, and I hate to be the one to break that peace. But I need you to know something that's been eating at me for months. It wasn't just a fling. I fell in love with him. I didn't plan to. I never wanted to hurt you. But I couldn't help it. He told me things I think he never told you. About how he felt trapped. About how he wished he'd met me first. I know what this makes me look like, and maybe I deserve it. But I also know I wasn't the only one at fault. He came to me. Please forgive me someday. Deborah." I dropped the letter like it was fire. I couldn't breathe. She had loved him. And worse, he might have loved her too. My knees buckled, and I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter fluttering to the floor. I stared at it like it was a snake, coiled and ready to strike again. The room spun. I felt my heart squeeze in ways it never had before. Not even when I found out about the affair. Not even when I left my husband. This emotional truth, was a whole new kind of pain. For hours I sat in that room, staring out the window. The sun sank. Darkness fell. And still, I sat, trapped in the words of a letter never meant for my eyes. At some point, I whispered to the empty room. Why wasn't I enough, for either of you? And that night, I cried in a way I hadn't since childhood. Loud, guttural, grieving not just the loss of trust, but the loss of the illusion that I had ever truly known either of them. Little did I know, the worst part hadn't even arrived yet. Because the next morning, I would wake up to a knock on the door, and what I found would break what little I had left. It was early, too early for visitors. The sun had barely started rising, and I was still in my nightgown, nursing a cup of tea I couldn't bring myself to sip. My eyes were swollen from crying all night. Sleep had danced just out of reach, taunting me with the rest I so desperately needed. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. For a moment I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. And after the chaos of the last few weeks, I had no desire for company. But something about that knock, it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't friendly either. It felt like the kind of knock that came with news. I stood slowly, heart pounding, and opened the door. And there he was. My husband, James. Looking thinner, older, tired. His eyes met mine with a mixture of regret and vulnerability I had never seen in him before. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just stared. My fingers curled around the edge of the door as I held myself upright. He looked past me, into the house that was once ours. Then, without waiting, he stepped in. I should have stopped him. I should have screamed, slammed the door in his face. But I didn't. Maybe part of me wanted answers. Or maybe I was too broken to resist anything anymore. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to eat Sunday pancakes and talk about dreams we never chased. I read the letter. I finally said, my voice cold and brittle. He looked down. "I figured you would. You lied to me," I whispered, over and over. "And now I know it wasn't just a mistake. You loved her." Silence. "I didn't plan to," he said slowly. "But yes, I did." The air between us went ice cold. I felt a chill settle into my bones. "And you expect me to do what with that truth?" I asked. He rubbed his face, his voice cracking. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came because I lost everything. And now I realize you were the only thing that ever truly mattered." I almost laughed. But it came out as a scoff. "Now, after you shared my daughter's bed." He winced like I had slapped him. It wasn't just lust. I was confused. I was. "Don't." I cut him off. "Don't insult me with excuses." He looked around the kitchen, eyes misty. "This house that still smells like you. Like home." I wanted to scream. To throw something. To destroy everything in that moment. But I didn't. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You didn't just cheat on me. You ruined my relationship with my daughter. You ruined the memories of this house. And for what? A thrill? A selfish, cowardly thrill." He said nothing. I took a breath, holding back the tears trying to spill again. "You're not welcome here. Not anymore. You made your choice." He stood up slowly, his face pale. "I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded once. "That's all you'll get from me. Goodbye, James." He walked out without another word. And when the door shut behind him, I collapsed to the floor, clutching my chest, sobbing. Not just from the pain, but from the quiet relief that it was truly over. He was gone. But the wounds he left behind were still wide open. And somewhere out there, Deborah was still living with the man who had shattered her mother. It was a Wednesday when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My bones ached from the cold, and my hands trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob. When I opened the door, I saw a young woman, mid-30s maybe, with eyes that shimmered with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Concern. "Are you Mrs. Elsie Bacora?" she asked, holding a small notebook and a pen. I hesitated. "Yes. Who are you?" She gave a soft smile. "My name is Temi. I'm a journalist. I've been trying to find you for months." My heart skipped. "Why?" She took a deep breath. "Because I heard about what happened to you. I want the world to hear it too." I blinked. For a moment, I felt dizzy. All these years I'd lived in silence. Everyone who knew what happened had either forgotten or pretended they never did. Now this stranger wanted to bring it into the light? I invited her in. My home wasn't much, but I made tea and we sat. Temi listened. Not the way people politely do, nodding and thinking about their phones. No, she listened. With tears in her eyes, with her jaw clenched at the cruel parts, with respect. And when I finished, I asked her the question I feared most. "What will telling this story do? Will it change anything?" She looked me in the eye and said, "Yes. You may not see all the change now, but silence is how abuse thrives. And your truth, It might set fire to someone else's chains. That night, after she left, I didn't sleep. My mind kept racing back through 40 years of pain, submission, and silent screams. But beneath it all was a flicker. A flicker of something I thought had died in me. Hope. After Temmie left, I found myself staring at the walls of my small sitting room, hearing her words echo louder than anything I'd heard in years. Your truth might set fire to someone else's chains. That phrase haunted me in a good way. For the first time, it wasn't just about surviving the past. It was about owning it. 3 weeks later, Temmie returned, with a photographer and a small recorder. She promised full control of the story would remain with me. I agreed cautiously. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The silence I'd lived with had become unbearable. It wasn't protection anymore, it was a prison. As I spoke, I didn't just tell my story. I released it. I talked about the beatings, the humiliation, how my own children ignored my cries for help, how I cooked, cleaned, and bled for a man who never once treated me like a partner, how I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, because the world outside our four walls offered no mercy to a woman who had failed her marriage. Temmie wept. Her photographer set the camera down at one point, unable to continue clicking the shutter. I told them about the night he broke my ribs, about the time he brought another woman home and told me to serve them dinner, about the day I lost my unborn baby from his fists. But I also told them about the quiet rebellion I'd nurtured in my heart. The day I started hiding money in a tin beneath the floorboards. The night I fed him soup without salt and didn't apologize. Little things. But they added up. Temmie's article went live exactly 1 month later. She titled it, 40 Years of Silence, 1 Day of Fire, Grandma Elsie's True Story. The internet exploded. Thousands of women reached out. Some in tears. Some in anger. Some saying, this is my story too. And some were people I knew. People who had ignored me. People who had sided with my husband. Now they were tagging the post and writing, we didn't know. We're sorry. I didn't answer them. I didn't need to. Because something bigger had begun. And it had my voice in it. The story went further than I ever imagined. What started as a whispered truth became a roaring storm. Calls came in, from journalists, from radio stations, even from women's rights groups wanting me to speak at conferences. Me? A woman who spent most of her life being told to be quiet? At first I said no. I was overwhelmed. I was afraid. But one evening, Temmie called again. Her voice was steady but kind. Grandma Elsie, you don't have to be loud. You just have to be honest. That's enough. So I agreed to speak on a local radio program. It was just 30 minutes. I sat in the studio, hands shaking, voice dry. But when I started to speak, it felt like pouring water on soil that had been cracked for decades. The host cried. Callers cried. One woman said, I'm leaving tonight. I swear. I'm packing and taking my children. Another whispered, you just saved my life, Mama. You just did. That night, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. My suffering was never just mine. It was a mirror, a warning, a lesson, a shield, and finally a weapon. But the past wasn't done with me yet. 2 days after that broadcast, my front door shook from the knock I hadn't expected. It was him, my husband. Old now, gray, frail, but still wearing that smirk that made my stomach twist. He said nothing at first, just looked around my house like he still belonged there. I heard what you've been saying about me, he said. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, then you know it's true. He scoffed. You're turning people against me. No, I replied, voice low. You turned people against you the moment you laid your hand on me the first time. There was silence. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. I raised you, he said. Fed you. Paid your bride price. You broke me, I said calmly. But I put myself back together. He left. Just like that. But he didn't take anything from me this time. Not my voice. Not my truth. Not my dignity. For the first time, I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Power. After he left my doorstep, I sat alone in my chair and stared at the wall. My hands were still. But inside a storm raged. For 40 years, I had been a wife in silence, a mother in fear, a woman made small. But now, I was becoming someone else. It began with the women. They came one by one, sitting at my feet like we were around a fire in the old days. Some I had known from church. Others were neighbors I barely spoke to. But now, they came with swollen eyes and trembling mouths. And I listened. One said, "He locks me in at night. With the children." Another said, "If I speak, my family will disown me." And one barely 20 whispered, "He raped me. He said no one would believe me because I'm just his wife." Each story felt like an echo of my own. Each tear was one I had already cried. So I opened my arms. My house became a place of refuge, of truth-telling, of healing. Some men came too, survivors of abuse, of humiliation. People think it's only women who suffer in silence. But I learned pain doesn't pick favorites. It finds anyone it can silence. The local church asked me to speak. The school invited me to share my story with young girls. Even the market women began to nod at me with a kind of respect I never knew I needed. Temi helped me set up a foundation. We didn't have much, just a bench, a dusty room, and courage. But the name we gave it meant everything. I am not your silence. That became my anthem. But not everyone clapped. Some said I was embarrassing my family. Some relatives warned me to let the past be past. But I had lived in the past far too long. One night, as I stood on my veranda, I whispered to myself, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become after it." It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. The kind of day where the sun kissed the trees gently and the breeze carried the scent of something soft, maybe peace. I had just finished brewing tea when a knock came at the door. A soft knock. Hesitant. I opened it. And there he stood. My husband. The man who had walked out of my life like I was a forgotten coat on a dusty hook. He looked older. The swagger he used to wear like perfume had faded. His eyes weren't cruel, just empty. His hand shook slightly as he held a cheap plastic bag filled with God knows what. His shirt was too big. His shoes cracked. He had returned like a ghost that forgot how to haunt. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply said, "Why?" He opened his mouth but no words came out. Only silence. So I repeated, "Why are you here?" I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. And there it was. The truth. He hadn't come for forgiveness. He had come because no one else would have him. But I wasn't the same woman he left behind. I looked at him not with hate, not even anger, just clarity. "You didn't just leave me," I said. "You erased me. And now you come back like this house is still yours." His eyes dropped. "I'm sorry." "I'm not the woman you left behind," I whispered. "I buried her." Then I stepped aside, not to let him in, but to let myself walk away. I walked past him down the porch steps through the front gate, into the world I had rebuilt without him. A world where I was no longer waiting, no longer begging, just living. Walking away from him that day was not a performance. It wasn't a dramatic movie ending. It was freedom. A quiet, steady pulse in my chest that whispered, "You're doing the right thing." I didn't look back. As I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had been spoken with silence and clarity. I had mourned that marriage. Now I was mourning nothing. Because I had found everything in myself. For the first time in decades, I began to feel something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not grief. Not even joy. Peace. I had thought peace would come if he returned. But peace came when I no longer cared whether he did or didn't. The neighbors talked, of course. Some said I was cruel for not taking him back. Others said I was strong. But none of them had lived my nights. None of them had known the sound of a woman crying into her pillow while pretending to be asleep. None of them had stood in that quiet kitchen, making dinner for a man who never came home. I had. And I had survived it. Each day after that encounter, I woke up feeling taller, though my back was still curved and my bones ached. Because the weight I carried was gone. The weight of being unwanted. The weight of always wondering, why wasn't I enough? Now I knew the truth. I was always enough. He just didn't know how to love someone like me, someone real. I went to the garden and planted new seeds. Tomatoes, basil, lavender. Because life, like a garden, doesn't stop because someone abandoned it. It just waits. And then it grows again. After his last visit, I expected the silence. But not the letters. At first, they came weekly. Sometimes scribbled and smudged. Other times too carefully written. As if trying to convince me he was a changed man. I still think of you every day. I know I made mistakes. Tell the children I love them. I never replied. Because I had already told the children. And they had already decided for themselves. At first, I read them. Then I stopped. They piled up in a drawer I never opened. They were like dried flowers. Once fragrant, now brittle and meaningless. One day, the letters just stopped. And I didn't even notice. Weeks passed. Then months. One morning I realized there hadn't been a single envelope in the mailbox with his handwriting. And that was when it hit me. I didn't care anymore. Not in anger. Not in revenge. But in release. That man, the one who ran away from his family, who left me to raise the children, who chose lust and freedom over loyalty, he no longer held power over me. He was a chapter. Not the book. I was writing the rest without him. My grandchildren noticed. They said I smiled more, laughed louder, stood straighter, because I was no longer looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to knock on my door again. That part of my life was gone. And what remained? Me. Stronger. Wiser. Unbroken. It was an ordinary morning. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the floor. I stood before the mirror, an old framed piece that had been in our house since the beginning. But that day I didn't just see an old woman. I saw a survivor. The lines on my face were no longer signs of aging. They were maps, etched by sorrow, joy, pain, and resilience. Every wrinkle had a story. Every scar had meaning. I remembered the girl I used to be. Innocent. Hopeful. The woman I became. Wife. Mother. Provider. And then left behind. For so long, I had looked into that mirror and mourned the life that slipped through my fingers. But not today. Today I saw pride. Pride in having raised children who, despite everything, grew into kind, strong, and thoughtful people. Pride in having survived betrayal, poverty, isolation, and coming through it not bitter but better. Pride in having learned to forgive, not for him but for me. Because carrying the weight of hate is heavier than carrying the weight of grief. And grief is love with nowhere to go. I closed my eyes and placed a hand on my chest. It still beat. Still strong. Still mine. I had spent years waiting for someone to make me feel loved. But in that mirror I saw the truth. I had always been enough. For years, I thought peace would arrive like thunder. Loud, undeniable, dramatic. But when it finally came, it came softly. Like a whisper in the wind. Like the hush of a baby's breath on your shoulder. I was sitting on the porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, when I realized I didn't feel pain anymore. Not the sharp stab of betrayal. Not the cold ache of abandonment. Not even the weight of unanswered questions. Just quiet. My grandchildren played in the garden, their laughter filling the air like music. The roses were in bloom, my favorite kind, wild pink with soft edges. The birds chirped as if they, too, had found something worth singing about. And I was still. Not because life had fixed itself. Not because justice had come knocking. Not because anyone ever truly said, "I'm sorry." But because I stopped needing them to. I had let go. Of the lies. Of the resentment. Of the illusion that things would go back to how they were. I stopped chasing closure and started building peace. Not around me, but inside me. I wrote letters I never sent. I cried tears that no one saw. I forgave people who would never ask for it. And in doing so, I gave myself something more precious than revenge. Freedom. Because sometimes the loudest justice is a life well lived. And the greatest revenge is a heart that no longer hurts. There was a time I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, not from age, but from carrying too many unspoken words. Her back bent, not from years, but from burdens no one else saw. She looked like someone who had been used, betrayed, forgotten. But today when I looked in the mirror, I smiled. Because I saw her again. The girl I used to be. Not the one who was naive or scared, but the one who was strong, kind, and bold, before the world tried to break her. And she's back. Not because life gave her back what it stole, but because she took it back herself. I took back my voice. I took back my worth. I took back my joy, not borrowed or begged but claimed. My story isn't a fairy tale. There's no prince who came to save me. No villain got locked away. No crowd stood up to cheer for my survival. But that's what makes it real. Because real stories don't need perfect endings. They just need truth. And I've lived mine. Now, as I sit with my great-granddaughter nestled in my arms, she asks me, "Grandma, were you ever sad?" I laugh gently and reply, "Yes, my darling. Many times." She looks confused. "But you're always smiling now." And I tell her, "That's because I didn't let the sadness win." Let this be a story not of what happened to me, but of what I became despite it. I am not just a woman who was used and discarded. I am not just a wife who was betrayed. I am not just a mother who was abandoned. I am a survivor. I am a warrior in quiet skin. I am a grandma who chose peace over revenge and found power in forgiveness. And above all, I found me. If this story touched your heart, please do me a favor. Make sure you subscribe to this Grandma Stories channel and let me know where you're watching from the comments section. Thank you.